All right, good evening. I'm going to talk real quick about plotting degrees on a coordinate plane and how to use them to find reference angles, which will be very important as we get into the unit circle. So, if you have a coordinate axis and this is your x-axis and your y-axis, and you're asked to plot, let's just say 200 degrees. Couple things you got to know, and then you'll be all set. The first is that this line right here on the x-axis is always considered as 0 degrees. And if you think about a perpendicular angle, as you rotate around the axis, every quadrant would represent 90 degrees. And so as you work your way around and do a complete revolution, when you get back to 0 degrees, this spot would also be considered 360. When you plot positive degrees, you're always going to go in a counterclockwise motion. So, this would be 90 degrees, 180 degrees, and then if you go a little past 180, this is about, again, I don't have my protractor out, but this angle, this arc, would represent 200 degrees. And so once you get the hang of this, it kind of hopefully clicks after a couple. If I did, 350 degrees. Again, you start at 0, you go counterclockwise. If I went all the way to 360, it'd be too far, so I'm going to stop just a little bit beforehand. And so, 350 degrees would end up stopping in quadrant 4. Somewhere around here. We usually draw a line here because in a second we're going to talk about reference angles. And again, if we're using trigonometry, we need to somehow find a triangle in here. And so this is generally how you graph an angle. Let's do one more. We'll say, 100 degrees. One quadrant would be 90, so a little past 90, this angle in here, this arc would be 100 degrees, again starting at 0. If it crossed your mind, if you're asked to graph a negative angle, let's say negative 250. Negative in math means opposite, so we're going to go the opposite direction. This would be negative 90. Negative 180. If I go all the way to this line, it'd be negative 270, so I want to stop. And this arc would represent negative 250 degrees. Okay, we're going to jump real quick into reference angles. And so when you're asked to plot an angle, let's actually just look at these last 4. When you're asked to plot an angle, we want to create something called a reference angle, and a reference angle, sometimes abbreviated with a little theta symbol and a ref as a subscript. It's always going to be an acute angle, which remember is less than 90. And let me just shade in a couple of these reference angles. If you take any angle you create and construct a perpendicular line to the x-axis. So take these angles, construct a perpendicular line to the x-axis. And this angle stopped right here, perpendicular line to the x-axis. Stopped right here, perpendicular line to the x-axis. The angle, I love these colors, the angle that is wedged up against your x-axis and this line, that angle right here, for all these, would be what's called your reference angle. And in order to find those angles, you kind of have to take what you know about rotations and use what you have to find what's left over, to find that little bit of a wedge. You know, if I get dialed in on this particular graph right here, if I know that the entire revolution is 360, but I don't want to count this 350, then this blue angle would be 360 degrees minus 350 degrees. And what you'd have left over is 10 degrees. That would be what we're calling the reference angle. If I jump down to this one down here, I know that this whole entire thing is 250 degrees. But I know that a half circle, half a rotation, that this thing down here that I don't want, that's 180 degrees. And so if I subtract off 180 degrees, what I'm left with is 70 degrees. And 70 degrees would be what's left over and what we're calling the reference angle. Notice that both of these angles, 10 degrees, 70 degrees, they're both acute angles, less than 90 degrees. If we do one more, if we look up at this 100 degrees, that arc is the arc that terminates here. I know that the entire half circle is 180 degrees, but I don't want to include that 100-degree arc. So I'm subtracting off this piece, and again I'm left with 80 degrees as my reference angle. When we start doing unit circle stuff, we start doing all sorts of things. We want to be able to find triangles that have large angles represented in them, and reference angles is going to be a way that we do that. So, all right, cool. Thanks for watching.